Chapter 8. The morning sun was just beginning to rise in the clear blue sky as Gabe jogged back to the resort. As usual, the run helped clear his head of troubling thoughts to gain a better perspective. A better viewpoint was just what he needed. All night long he had tossed and turned. His thoughts were filled with his new wife. Rory had a way of listening that made him want to tell her everything about his life. She had asked him some real personal questions last night. His soul had been stripped bare, and he didn't like it. Talking about how his dad had been betrayed and how the stress of that had caused his early death was a very touchy subject for him. He still missed his dad something fierce every day of his life. The memory of how he had failed to tell his dad what he sensed about Simon still haunted him to this day. All these years of helping others with his self-development training still hadn't made up for the fact that deep down he felt like he'd failed his dad when he needed him the most. It was such a vulnerable and painful place inside of him. It was the place where fear lived. He had a fear of being taken advantage by someone who wanted to use him, fear of letting down the people he loved. He had a fear of letting his guard down to allow people into his heart. Rory had a glimpse into his heart last night, and it scared him. What shook him to the core was the effect that Rory had on him. Gabe was convinced that a marriage in name only to Rory would be like all those summers they spent together as friends. He just assumed they would have fun together, and that would be it. Yet last night, when they were stargazing together, he felt closer to her than ever before. Listening to Rory share a story from her past made him long to do more than put his arms around her. Gabe wanted to kiss her with a passion that he was convinced would terrify her. There was a moment last night when he could have touched his lips to hers, but he had forced himself to be a gentleman. He had reminded himself that Rory was not only like a sister, but she trusted him with this marriage of convenience. But Gabe had wanted to kiss her. Oh, how he wanted to. But maybe now that he'd had his morning run, maybe now he'd be able to refocus. Gabe opened the door to their suite of rooms quietly so as not to wake his new bride. Stepping into the room, he looked around and finally saw Rory sitting with her knees up on a large cushioned lounge chair that overlooked the swimming area. His wife held a coffee cup in both hands, with her soft blonde hair falling in waves across her shoulders. The sleep-tousled look did not help with his new resolve to treat Rory as a friend only. So much for refocusing. "Good morning." Gabe stepped inside the room and closed the door, shrugging out of his hoodie before walking towards her. "Good morning, Gabe. You're up so early. You went for a morning jog?" He nodded, and she continued. "I should have done that myself. My only excuse is that I was feeling lazy and so relaxed this morning." "Good for you. A few lazy hours in the morning sounds like a good idea." "I ordered room service. Maria should be here soon with our breakfast." Rory took another sip of the steamy drink, and a layer of white foam formed above her pink lips. "You have a white foam mustache." Gabe stared at her lips, thinking how much he would love to taste the white foam and remove it from her lips. His wife flicked her tongue across her top lip, removing the foam. Gabe stepped back and promptly pulled his thoughts away from wayward desires. "I'm going to go shower quickly." He hurried to his room and into the shower. As he stepped out of the hot mist, he realized they needed to get out of the hotel to do something together. They needed to stay active. They needed to do something to underscore the fact that they were friends only. He slipped into jeans and a t-shirt and went into the dining area just in time to hear a knock at the door. As Gabe opened the door, the aroma of cooked eggs and hot coffee greeted him. That sure smells good. We can put it over here." Gabe moved the newspapers and his laptop off the table to make room for Maria to set down the trays. Rory came over to the table, picking up lids that covered the plates, breathing deeply of the aroma. "Thank you so much, Maria." "See, you're welcome. Will there be anything else?" Maria looked back and forth from Rory to Gabe, her eyes a nervous flutter. "Just one more thing. Do you know how we could get today's schedule for the boat that takes guests whale watching?" Gabe looked over at Rory, and her bright smile convinced him this was a good idea. "Si, senor. My uncle Jose Moreno runs one of the whale-watching boats for tourists. Maria pulled out a piece of paper from her apron pocket. Here, it says today he takes people at 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So your uncle runs the touring boat. Are your families from the same village then? My village is only an hour away. It's a small seaside village called Pipa. I work there to help out my family. Maria lowered her head. That's something to be proud of, Maria. Gabe noticed Rory's gentle words took away any sting of awkwardness. And we'll be sure to tell your uncle you recommended his whale-watching boat, Maria. Gabe smiled and nodded. Si, senor, thank you. Oh, and bring warm clothes, it's chilly on the water. Maria nodded and just as quickly backed out of the room, closing the door behind her. That's great that Maria's uncle runs the tourist boat. It is great, Gabe. I'm just wondering why Maria looked a little afraid. Did you notice that? Rory stood there staring at the closed door for a moment before she turned back to him. Gabe thought about it for a minute. Maria does seem a little nervous. I assumed that's because we're new here and she's just getting to know us. Rory tilted her head to the side, her brow puckered in worry. No, I have a gut feeling it's more than that. Maybe next time I see Maria, I'll have a chance to get to know her better. Well, that's a good idea. Gabe pulled out a chair at the table for Rory just as his stomach rumbled. He chuckled. For now, we'll eat. We have just enough time to eat and get to the whale-watching boat this morning. By the time they finished their breakfast, changed into jeans, and walked down to the marina, it was time for the whale-watching to begin. As they approached the port, there were a few large boats waiting in the harbor. Some had just left the area filled with tourists, and only a couple of boats remained waiting for last-minute stragglers to show up. Gabe walked to the workers who were wearing the orange vest of the tour guide. Finally, he found the man he was looking for. Are you Jose Moreno? Si, senor. You want to go see the whales? Maria's uncle was a short, stocky man with a deep olive complexion and a big smile. Yes, we do. Your niece Maria recommended you as our tour guide. At Maria's name, the older man chuckled. Si, Maria is my niece. She's a good girl. Her papa no understand why she hasn't been home in 2 years. Maria says she's too busy, but she will go home yet. The man's smile wavered a little and then pointed to the boat. You want to see the whales? Yes, we do. I think we're ready. Rory? Gabe held out his hand to Rory and they walked toward the dock. After they slipped on their life jackets, they stepped onto the large boat. There were 8 other men, women, and children who talked excitedly as they waited for the boat to start moving. Rory sat beside Gabe and squirmed in excitement. Her wide-eyed gaze searched the water and shoreline as the boat moved along the coast. She pointed suddenly to the shore. Look over there. There's sea lions. Gabe turned to see the light brown animals as they moved slowly along the beach. Not too far away from them were a colony of cormorant birds and a cluster of penguins. I love looking at the penguins. It looks like they're always wearing tuxedos and ready to go to a party. Rory giggled beside him. Yeah, they definitely are cute, Gabe agreed. Unexpectedly, Maria's uncle stopped the engine of the boat. They were far from the coast with the Atlantic Ocean all around them. For a moment, the silence was only interrupted by the sounds of penguins, seagulls, and cormorants. Rory grabbed Gabe's hand. He looked down to see her violet eyes widen as she pointed to the water on the other side of the boat. Their whole group was quiet for a moment. Gabe heard a clicking sound, and then a whistling noise as something silvery and white jumped out of the water near the boat. A loud splash startled them all as the whale's body landed with a thud back into the ocean. Wow, that's just beautiful, Rory whispered beside Gabe. He squeezed her hand, loving her excited response to the sight. She held up her smartphone and took several pictures of the whales. Look over there. There's dolphins jumping and playing beside the whales too. 2 of the children on board with them looked where Rory pointed and got all excited, shouting at the whales in the water. Soon everyone was laughing and speaking at once. Gabe enjoyed having Rory at his side for the full hour their boat drifted on the water. All too soon their tour guide started the boat's engine and they headed back to shore. Thank you for the wonderful tour, Jose, Rory spoke to Maria's uncle. Gabe shook his hand and asked him about his village. Do you have people who harvest seaweed and other plants in your village, Jose? Si, senor. A few families. My wife and I are interested in finding seaweed and other plants that would help my wife make skincare creams. Do you know of some people who would be interested in being our guide to show us the sea plants near your village? Gabe asked. Si. Come tomorrow morning at 9. I will meet you at the Red Library building on the corner of Main Street. You can follow me from there. Jose grinned and shook his hand. Thank you, Jose. We'll be there. Gabe nodded and grabbed Rory's hand as they drove back to the resort. Rory looked over at Gabe strangely. What? I just wanted to get going on this project. I'm sure Jose knows people who would know where to find the best spots for sea plants and the brown marine algae you need. Gabe squeezed her hand. It's okay. We'll figure this out together. Rory sighed. I know it'll be all right. I think I'm just admiring how you simply decide to go after something that you want. That's something I could learn from you. I tend to be shy and slightly timid about asking anyone for help. Gabe could see the uncertainty in his wife's large eyes. Maybe it would help if you talked to Jose and the others tomorrow. That might really help you feel more courageous and would also give you the answers you need for this project. Maybe. Rory hesitated, and he quirked an eyebrow at her. Okay, you're right. I will do the talking tomorrow. Gabe was learning new things about Rory. He made a mental note to continue to help his wife and encourage her to do things beyond what she believed she was capable of doing. Soon after they arrived back at the resort, they went to their suite and showered and changed into clean clothes. Since the weather had turned unusually hot for this time of year, Gabe changed into shorts and a t-shirt ready to enjoy some sun. Rory stood waiting for him by the door. She wore a dark purple t-shirt and white shorts. The combination of clothing made her violet eyes stand out and emphasized her slim, tanned legs. His wife was beautifully formed. Gabe quickly returned his gaze to her face and reminded himself that no matter how big the temptation, he should not be gawking at Rory. Should we try out one of those restaurants in the main area of the resort? That sounds like a good idea. Gabe followed her downstairs to the large main area, and soon they were seated at a nice Italian restaurant. As they waited for their food, they sipped water for a moment before Rory spoke. When you talked to Maria's uncle today, he said her papa was sad that she hadn't been home in 2 years because she'd been too busy with work. What do you make of that? Gabe chuckled a little at his wife. Rory, you sure are concerned about Maria. Maybe there's nothing to make of it at all. Maybe she really is too busy to go home. Rory scowled a little at him. I don't know about that. And yes, I am concerned about Maria. Call it a gut feeling, but I believe not everything is as it should be in her life. All right, fine. I adore the fact that you are very compassionate toward others, Rory. Gabe smiled at the waiter who brought their plates of food. Thank you, Rory replied with a warmth in her tone that was lacking before. Maybe you could ask her mother or one of her brothers or sisters tomorrow. I think Jose plans to take us to Maria's family home in Pipa. I guess I could, Rory conceded. After a refreshing meal, they both agreed that a little time sitting in the sun would be ideal. They went to their suite to grab their swimsuits and towels and soon found a lovely quiet spot poolside. Gabe watched as Rory reached into her beach bag and pulled out a book. He grabbed a book too. So what are you reading, Rory? I love reading romances, so I brought along a new novel by one of my favorite authors. Rory peered over at the book in his hands and her eyes widened. Are you reading one of the books I wrote? Gabe chuckled at her surprised look. I thought it would be a good idea. Maybe I'll get to know some of your secrets that way. He could see a stain of red starting on her neck that rose quickly to her cheeks. I noticed that this is the first book in your Island Romance series, and I thought since you spent most of your childhood on Walker's Island, that this story would be a great starting place. Gabe leafed through the front pages of the book. Besides, the dedication of this book really piques my interest. To the one man who started my love of romance in the first place. I'd love to know who you dedicated this book to, Rory. Gabe glanced up and looked over at Rory, hoping his wife would answer him, only to be surprised when she stood to her feet beside her lounge chair. Hurrying, she put her t-shirt on over her bathing suit. I'm sorry, Gabe. I forgot something in our room. I have to go. I'll be back soon. Puzzled, Gabe watched his wife as she hurried across the poolside deck and disappeared through the doors that led to the elevators. What was so important that she had to dash off so quickly? Was it something he said? One thing he knew for sure, he still had a lot to learn about his wife. Rory's legs and arms shook in the elevator all the way up to the top floor to their suite of rooms. She was so shook up that Gabe, her best friend since she was 6 years old, was reading one of her romances. Opening the door to their room, she closed it quickly and leaned her head against the door. Did Gabe have to choose that series to read? That was the series where she had poured so much of her romantic imaginings of how it could be if Gabe would fall in love with her. It was her love for Gabe that had got her started writing romance in the first place. That's what had inspired the dedication to that book, but she wasn't about to tell him that. Rory walked across the room and poured herself a glass of water. Her hands were still shaking from his almost discovery of one of her biggest secrets. She was convinced she needed to keep her love for Gabe Stevenson a secret. They might be married, but it was a fake marriage. If Gabe found out she loved him, most likely he would believe she was manipulating him, and that was the last thing she wanted him to think of her. No, her love for her husband would have to remain a secret, though how she would do that she had no clue. Each day he was so nice to her. Gabe had thoughtfully figured out a way that she could get more of those sea plants that she so desperately needed to make the formula for her organic skin creams. All these thoughtful and generous acts that Gabe did also made her realize more and more that he wasn't the selfish man she believed he'd become over the years. Rory had thought that the money and fame would have changed him into someone who could no longer appreciate the little things or the little people. But that didn't appear to be what happened to Gabe. He had changed, but he had done his best to become a better man. Rory took another long drink of water and walked towards the window that looked down to the pools. For a moment she watched her husband as he relaxed in the sun with his nose in a book. She would need to keep her guard up, or Gabe would find out her horrible secret. The fact that his fake wife was in love with him. Her husband only wanted to be married for 1 year. She wanted to be married for a lifetime. Her husband held himself back from falling in love. She was already in love with him. It was an impossible situation. Rory didn't know how long she stood there thinking until she finally remembered Gabe waited for her. She needed to get back downstairs. Belatedly, she remembered telling Gabe she needed to grab something from their room. Spying the sunscreen on the corner of the counter, she quickly grabbed it and opened the door. Stepping into the hallway, she overheard a heated conversation. She stopped in her tracks and backed up into the room, leaving the door open slightly. A man's angry voice spoke loudly, with a mixture of English and Spanish. Then a familiar woman's voice spoke a rapid volley of words in reply. Rory caught a little of what they were saying. She peeked her head out of the door and looked down the hallway. Near the end of the hallway, she could see a large, dark-haired man holding Maria's arms in a tight grip. His face was a mask of anger, and his words dripped with contempt. "You don't have a choice." Maria winced as the man's fingers seemed to grip her arms harder. "This was our deal. Get a job here. Now I want you to do more. You have no choice." Rory put her hand to her mouth and she sucked in a breath. Was the man forcing Maria to do something she didn't want to do? Did he have some kind of control over her? "No, Senor, I will not agree." Maria tried to pull away from the man, but he held tightly to her arm. Rory could hear the desperation and panic in Maria's voice. "You will do this, or there's big trouble for you." The man jerked her arms one more time before he suddenly let her go. The man hurried away from Maria, and Rory could hear her maid's hushed sobs. When the man disappeared down the elevator, Rory stepped out into the hallway and hurried over to Maria. Maria saw her coming and hurried to dry her tears. "Mrs. Stevenson, I'm sorry. You need me for something?" "No, Maria, I don't need anything. I wanted to see, are you all right?" Rory hoped Maria would tell her something. "Si, Signora, I'm good. I should get back to work." Rory spoke quickly as the maid started to move away. "Wait a minute, please," she pressed, needing to know what was going on. I overheard some of what the man said to you. He was forcing you to do something you didn't want to do. Is he your boss? What's his name?" Maria glanced away for a moment. Looking down, she spoke quickly. "See, he's my boss. His name is Carlos Santos. But I can't tell you what he's doing. He would hurt my family." Maria started picking up supplies from the cart she pushed. "I'm late. I have to go." "Maria, we will help you. We can help you get away from this man and stop him from hurting your family," Rory whispered passionately, hoping that her new friend would listen. "No one can help me now, Signora. It's too late. I must go." Maria hurriedly pushed her cart down the hallway. Rory stared at the retreating maid. Sadness hovered over her, and she wished there was something she could do. Just then the elevator doors opened and Gabe stepped out. "There you are, Rory. I thought you were coming back." Gabe walked towards her, the corners of his mouth turned up with mischief until he looked at her closely. Gently, he placed one finger under her chin and looked into her eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "Rory, what's wrong?" Rory quickly wiped away the tears that had formed as she continued to think of Maria's situation. "Oh, Gabe, I'm so sad about Maria." Rory explained to him what she'd overheard. "It's like he's threatening her. And Maria told me that if she tells me what's going on, that man will hurt her family. I'm really worried about Maria. Is there anything we can do to help?" Gabe caught a stray tear with his thumb. It had slipped out of the corner of one eye unnoticed. His blue eyes focused on hers. "Oh, Rory, you really do have a soft heart. It's one of the things I adore about you." Warmth stirred in her belly at his words, and she averted her gaze for a moment. Forcing a relaxed smile, Rory spoke again. "Thank you, Gabe. But I'm really worried about our maid. Is there something we can do to help Maria?" "Yes, there is. I'll call a friend who'll be able to look into it." Gabe reassured her, and Rory blew out a small breath of relief. "Okay, that sounds good." Rory nodded, feeling so much better. "Why don't you head down to the swimming pool area, and I'll make that call. I'll join you soon." Gabe walked with her to the elevator, and she waved at him as the door closed. Walking towards the poolside lounge area, her thoughts turned to Gabe. The very fact that he was willing to take his time and money to help someone he barely knew who was in need spoke well of him. Her husband was fast becoming a hero in her eyes. Rory was growing attached and more in love with her fake husband than ever before. She didn't know how to stop these feelings that were blossoming more and more with each day she spent with him. Did she even want to? "Hello, Max. Gabe Stevenson here." "Hey, man, what's up?" "I have a name I'd like you to investigate. His name is Carlos Santos. He's been threatening one of the workers here, and I'm wondering what we can do to stop him." Gabe explained more details about the situation. "I'd like to fly you and some key people on your team to investigate more about what's going on with this guy. Would that work for you?" "Of course, man. I'll first do a little background check on this guy. I'll be there tomorrow morning with 2 guys from my team." Max's crisp, businesslike tone set Gabe's mind at ease. "Great. Thanks, Max." Gabe turned his phone off and set it in his case beside his bed. As he headed out the door and down the elevator, he thought of Rory. His childhood friend had become someone whom he realized was not like other women he knew. Rory had a compassion for others who were in pain, unlike anyone he'd known except maybe his own mother. His new wife was fast becoming one of the most important people in his life. He was beginning to like her far more than he thought possible. He was beginning to like her far more than he should. It was confusing. How could he stop these growing feelings for his fake wife? Did he even want to?